Yevamos Daf Pei Hey finishes off the Gemara's discussion about is there an Isser for a Chalola, for a Chalol to marry a Kohenes Ksheira. The Gemara has been discussing that for a while. The Gemara will now show an incident that happened which brings us to a conclusion in that discussion. The Gemara will then go into the question of Ksuba as it applies to Shnios La'arayis. Does she get a Ksuba from her Yavam? In that situation, we'll explain the question. And then the Gemara will go into a lengthy discussion about the halachos of Ksuba and some of the other details that are awarded together with the main Ksuba as far as it applies to an Isser Da'iraisa versus an Isser D'Rabbanan. The Gemara will go over a number of explanations as to why an Isser D'Rabbanan loses her Ksuba and an Isser Da'iraisa does not, and explain some exceptions to the rule. So let's begin. The Gemara has been discussing whether or not a Cholol is Asr to a Kohenes Ksheira. The Gemara says that this question was asked to Rav Papa and Rav Huna Rav Yeshua when they went to Hintzivo or possibly Shachnitziv, the town of Rav Baravin. So this question was asked, and Rav Papa answered, we learned it in the Mishnah. The question again was, if a Kohenes is Asr to a Cholol, we know that the other way around is a problem. A Chalola is Asr to a Kohen. What about a Kohenes to a Cholol? So Rav Papa said, if you look at the list of Yuchsin, the 10 types of genealogical features, so it lists 10 types and who's allowed to marry who. So it says Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, Charurim, those are freed Avodim, Mamzerim, Nesinim, those are the Givonim, Shtuki and Asufi, those are 2 types of Sfeikus. So the halacha there was as follows: Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim are allowed to marry each other. Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, Charurim are allowed to marry each other, but obviously Chalalim, Gerim, and Charurim are also to Kohanim. Gerim, Charurim, Mamzerim, Nesinim, Shtuki, and Asufi are allowed to marry each other, but not allowed to marry Yisraelim, Leviim, or Kohanim. So the Gemara points out the following thing. It does not say that a Kohen, a Kohenes, is allowed to marry a Cholol. It says Kohen, that Kohanim are listed separately, not allowed to marry a Chalolim, and Chalolim are listed separately from Kohanim. It does not put together those two in any way. So that clearly shows that a Kohenes is Asr and a Cholol. So where it says Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua said that's not a Taina. They only listed the people where the men and the ladies are both allowed to marry each other, where both the males of both types are allowed to marry the females of both types. That's where it listed that these types are allowed to marry each other. But here, where a Kohen is not allowed to marry a Chalala, it didn't say that a Kohenes is allowed to marry a Chalal, even if that's mutter. So the Gemara says, they went and they discussed it with Ravidi Bar Oven, and he said, children, this is what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, there is no Isser for Kohanos, Ksheros, to marry Psulim. Alright, now the Gemara goes into the question of Shnios Midavri Sofim. Those are secondary relations that are Asam Midrabanan. So our Mishnah had discussed a possible situation where a woman is a Shnia to her husband, or to her Yavam, or to neither, or to both of them. So now the Gemara discusses what do we say, and as far as a Ksuba is concerned. Ksuba, generally the rule is that a woman who does Yibum gets her Ksuba from her original husband. The second husband doesn't have to give her a Ksuba. Unless there's no money from the first husband, then the second husband gives her a Ksuba, then the Yavam gives her a Ksuba. So the question over here is, what happens in a case where she's a Shnia to her husband, and she's not a Shnia to her Yavam? Now the halacha is that a marriage to a Sheni La'arayis, to a Shnia Midrabanan, loses the Ksuba. So this woman has no right to collect her Ksuba from her original husband because she's a Sheni La'arayis to him. However, she does have a right to collect the Ksuba from her Yavam, were that to be the original marriage. Question is here, where there was no right for the original husband doesn't owe her Ksuba, does she have a right to go to the Yavam and say, hey, just like the case where my original husband has no money, I get to come to you. So here also I should get to come to you. So Rav Shesh's answers, we learned this in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is clearly a woman gets her Ksuba from her first husband. Even if she has a Yavam, her claim is on her first husband. If she was a Shnia to her first husband, she does not get even from the Yavam. So the Gemara says, okay, I see the proof clearly that if she doesn't get from her first husband because she was a Shnia, she doesn't get from the Yavam either. But why does it say even from the Yavam? That implies that there's a different situation where she does get from the Yavam, but here she doesn't get even from the Yavam. What is that different situation? The Mishnah here didn't discuss anything. So the Gemara says there's missing words here. You have to add in that if her original husband didn't have any money, then she takes from the Yevam's Rishos. But if she doesn't get from her original husband, not because of the money, But because she was a shnia, then she does have a right. Then she does not have a right to have a claim from the yavam. Even from the yavam, she does not get anything. All right, now the Gemara is going to go into a comparison of the halachos of an iser d'oraisa, where there is a ksuba, and in iser d'rabbanan where there's no ksuba. So we saw in our Mishnah that if a woman is married to a shnia, which is an iser d'rabbanan, she loses her rights to her ksuba, as well as all the things that go along with it. That is mizonos, that he's chayiv to give. He has to monetarily support his wife while he's alive and after he dies. Also, he has to give her the value of the profits that he uses from her property, nichsei malug and nichsei tzon varzel. Those are two separate awards that are given to her when the marriage is dissolved. He has to pay her for what he used that property, which belonged to her, that she brought into the marriage. And the Mishnah had a list of a number of other benefits that are promised to her from the ksuba. Now, there we said that all these are lost to a shnia. She doesn't get the right to the ksuba. But a doiraisa iser, that's a woman who is married to, so if you have an almona to a kohen gadol, a grusha chalutza to a kohen hedyet, she does have the right to ksuba. So the Gemara asked, we didn't say anything about the other tenayim, the other conditions of the ksuba. What about mizonos? Does she have a right, for example, to get supported monetarily by her husband, who she's also to in an iser deraisa? So the Gemara says, let's break the question down. If she's still living with him, she's still married to him, so for sure she doesn't have a right to claim support from him, because she doesn't even have a right to be married to him. He has to divorce her. So there's no way that he needs to pay her to live. The question is, what if he went and he traveled away? So there's no longer any iser between them. He lives overseas. Does he have to support her now because she is technically his wife, but there's no iser now? Now, what's the question over there? So this is a case that's brought up in Mesachas Ksubis a number of times where she can borrow money. If her husband's away, she can borrow money, and she has to pay back the person who lent it to her. And whatever she spends on her own sustenance, when her husband comes back, she claims it from him because he owes her support. So that would be the question over here. Now, what's the question? What exactly is the issue? Why should she or should she not get support from her husband? So generally, what's the reason that she doesn't get support? Why do we take away support? So anytime there's an isser for a man and woman to be married to each other, we take the support away there because we want her to get out of the marriage. We want her to leave. We don't want this marriage to continue. It's a forbidden marriage. So do we say here also we don't want her to get support from her husband? We want her to exit the marriage, to ask for a divorce, to separate. So therefore she shouldn't get mizonos from him even though he's away. Now, ksuba he gets. Ksuba he has to give her. Ksuba she gets. What's the reason? Because ksuba is something that he gives her when she leaves. So if he's going to give her a ksuba, take the ksuba and leave. That's not going to, the fact that she gets a ksuba from him is not going to keep her in the marriage. She could just claim the ksuba and leave right now. But if she gets support from him, that would keep her in the marriage. So maybe we would say that she should not get mizonos because it's a forbidden relationship over here. So the Gemara says that this question was asked by Rabbi Elazar from Rabbi Yechanan, and he said she does not get support. She does not get mizonos. So the Gemara says there's a brisa that says that she does get. So the answer was that brisa is referring to after her husband dies without divorcing her. There's no longer any question of her staying in the marriage. The marriage is over. However, she's an almana, and the rule is that an almana has to be supported by her husband's estate. So she does get the right to that support from his estate since they were still married when he died. Now, there's a different version of this whole conversation where the answer that Rabbi Yochanan gave was that she does have the right to support, and then Rabbi Elazar asked Akasha, why should she get support if she needs to be divorced? I mean, even if he's away, she still has no right to stay married to him. So how does that even make, okay, fine, you don't want to knas her to make her, encourage her to leave, but the same taina you said before when she's living with him, that he has to divorce her, so why should she need to pay? So here also he has to divorce her, even though he's away, why should he need to pay? So that was the taina that Rav Elazar came back with, And Rabbi Yochanan said, but we have a brisa that says yesh lo, a brisa that says that she gets support, and he said that could be that brisa is not a proof because that's talking about after he dies, where there's no irrelevant the fact that he was mechayev to divorce her since he died already. All right, now the Gemara is going to bring a brisa which gets into the subject of why is there a difference? Why is it that in Issa Daraisa, like Almana Kohen Gadol Gusha V'Chalutza to a Kohen Hedyot, there is a ksuba, but in the Rabbanon there is no ksuba? So the brisa is as follows: Almana Kohen Gadol Gusha V'Chalutza to a Kohen Hedyot. She has the right to ksuba. She has the right to the profits, to be repaid the profits from her property. She gets worn out clothing that she brought into the marriage, and she gets mizonos. She gets financial support as long as she's in the marriage and if she's in Almana. Now, what happens to her, to him, and to the children? So this marriage makes her a puzzle. She becomes a chalola. She's usher to kohanim. Her children are chalolim as well, so they are psulim. And we force him to divorce her. They have to be set free. There's not a marriage that is allowed to last. This is all the Issa Daraisa of Amanal Kohen Gadol Gusha V'Chalutza to Kohen Hedyot. However, Shnios L'Arayis M'Divrei Sofrim, secondary relationships that the Torah didn't aser but Chazal asered, there is no ksuba, no peiros, no profits, no mizonos, no support, and no worn out clothing. She doesn't get any of that. However, in this case, she doesn't become pasul. Her children don't become pasul. There is no psul of chalala, and we do force him to divorce her and set her free. So now the Gemara discusses what's the difference between the two. So Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, what is the reason that Almana Kohen Gadol has a ksuba and all those things? And that's because there is a psul. She becomes pasul. He becomes pasul as well. His psul is to do the avoda. Is now, if he's a Kohen, is allowed to do the avoda as long as he's in this marriage, and he is in this description. And anytime there's a psul, so Rav Shimon ben Elazar says they made a rule that he has to pay the ksuba. And the reason is that we didn't have to take the ksuba away from her. The only reason to take the ksuba away from her, which is what we did when in the Shnios L'Arayis M'Divrei Sofrim, is because we want her to get out of this marriage. We want them to split it up. So if there's no ksuba, she's going to try to pull out of it. She has no support. She has no mizonos. There's no ksuba. She wants to get out of this and get into a marriage where she has support and she has a ksuba. This marriage we don't have to, because since they're psulim, since they passel each other, it's going to cause fighting between them, and the marriage is not going to last anyway. So according to this understanding of Rav Shimon ben Elazar, our aim here is always to break up these forbidden relationships. If there is psul, if somebody has a psul, it breaks up anyway, we don't have to do anything. If not, then we have to get involved and take away the ksuba from her, and that will cause her to get out of it. Now, Rebbe has a different shot. Rebbe says on an Isser Do'iraisa we didn't have to do anything because we didn't have to be mechazik it. Isser Do'iraisa is viewed as being stringent, and people are machmer in it. And Isser D'Rabbanan, like Shnios L'Arayis, there we had to get involved because people didn't view that as being serious, and they had to create knossos, and therefore we had to take away her ksuba. Now the brisa ends off with one last line. It says another pshat. This one is her fault, this one is his fault. Meaning to say that in the case where we took the ksuba away from her, that's where she's the one who's considered to be responsible for this marriage. She probably talked him into it. Where we don't take the ksuba away is where he talked her into it. What's the explanation behind that? So the Gemara says the understanding is as follows. In a case where nobody loses anything, there's no psul, so we assume that she talked him into it, because usually she's the one who wants the marriage more than the other one. And therefore, if there's no psul involved, she's probably the one who's responsible for it. If, however, there is a psul on the kids, if the kids or her or him, if somebody becomes pasul here, he probably talked her into it, because she doesn't want to get into a situation where there's a psul. It's going to create an uncomfortable relationship between them, so she doesn't want that. He doesn't care about the psul, he doesn't care about the discomfort it'll cause, so he definitely talked her into it. Therefore, in any case where there's a psul, according to this third shot, in any case where there's a psul on any of them, that's where we blame him, and that's why he loses the ksuba in the case of a psul. That's why all those Isuri Deraisa where there's a psul, there is a ksuba, because we blame him, and therefore he needs to pay the ksuba. In the case of the Isurei D'Rabbanan, where she doesn't become puzzle, he doesn't become puzzle, and the kids don't become puzzle, we assume she talked him into it. That's why she needs Arayas. She loses her ksuba because she's responsible for it. So now the Gemara says, who said this third pshat? Was it Shimon ben Elazar or was it Rebbe? So the Gemara's first explanation is that this is Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and this is another explanation. This is a different explanation for what he said. His original pshat. He had originally said that where there's a psul, that's where we say that she does not lose her ksuba, but if there's no psul, she loses her ksuba. So before we said that the reasoning behind that is that we need a reason to break the marriage up. If there's a psul, there already is one. If there isn't, we have to create one. Now, there's a different explanation that if there's a psul, then he probably talked her into it, and if there's no psul, then she talked him into it. Now, the Gemara's second approach is to say that this is not really Rav Shimon ben Elazar, this is another pshat that Rebbe said, and the reason why Rebbe said this pshat is because he had a problem. His original answer to why there's a difference between an Isser D'Oraisa and Isser D'Rabbanan is because Isser D'Rabbanan requires a chizuk. You have to make gzeira to support it. The problem is chalutza. Chalutza is only Asser to Kohanim D'Rabbanan. And chalutza over here, we said, follows the rules of a D'Oraisa, that she gets a ksuba. So he was bothered by that. And therefore he said this new pshat, that any situation where you have a psul, that's where we say that it is his fault. Chalutza, there's a psul, and that's why it's his fault, and that's why she, even though it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, that's why she still gets her ksuba, because we blame him for it. Alright, now the Gemara says, let's find a situation where there's a case that's a difference between these two explanations. So we have an argument that what the explanation is, it should be a case that depends on that argument. So the Gemara is comparing now Rebbe's first pshat and this third pshat, which is either Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's original pshat or Rebbe's second pshat. So we are comparing where it's a D'Oraisa versus D'Rabbanan, that's the first pshat, or whose fault it is there a psul or not. So in order to find a difference between the cases, we're going to look for something which is D'Oraisa, and therefore, according to Rebbe's first pshat, she should yes get her ksuba, but it's going to be her fault. We're going to blame her for it, which means that there is no psul. So where you have a D'Oraisa that does not create a psul, and that way she doesn't care about it. And that way she's not concerned that it'll disrupt this marriage, and therefore she'll talk him into it. So the Gemara is going to look for it. The Gemara will say, according to each one that we choose, we're going to have 4 different attempts here. Each one is not going to fit according to all shitas until we find one at the end that does. So the Gemara's first approach is Rav Chizda, and he says it's a mamzeres to a nisina, a mamzeres or a nisina to a Yisrael. Now, there in that situation, there's no real psul. She's puzzle anyway. He doesn't become a puzzle. The kids will be mamzerim, but her kids are going to be mamzerim anyway, and it's not going to create a problem for him. He's not going to care that his kids become mamzerim by marrying her, because there's a way to fix mamzerim. Marry them to a shivcha, and then the kids are avadim, and free the avadim. There's a way to fix mamzeris, therefore it's not an issue. Now, this is also an Isser D'Oraisa. So according to the pshat, that Isser D'Oraisa, she gets her ksuba, so here she gets her ksuba. According to the pshat that there is no psul, so it's her fault, this is her fault because there's no psul. So the Gemara says that's only good according to the opinion, which is Rabbi Tarfon, that there is a way to correct mamzeris through this shivcha eved freeing trick. According to Rabbi Eliezer, that doesn't work. You can't do that because an eved mamzer stays a mamzer. Even when you free him, he's a mamzer. So this isn't going to be correct. She won't want to do this because it will be absolved, and for she didn't talk him into it, he talked her into it. So we need a new pshat. So Rabbi Yosef says that the difference between the two is a machzer grushasim mishenise, somebody who divorces his wife and she marries someone else and then he remarries her. It's an Isser D'Oraisa. Therefore, according to Rebbe's first pshat, she should get iksuba. However, she's probably the one who talked him into it because there's no psul that's created because of this. The Gemara says, but what about according to Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says that any chayvei lav makes mamzera, so then there is a psul here. So the Gemara brings the third pshat, and that's Rav Papa. Rav Papa says it's talking about a be'ula to a kohen gadol. That's not a lav at all. But ula, someone who is not an almana, but she's not a psula either. So it's a violation of the essay of psula me'ama vikach. Him me'ama vikach. So that's an iser asay. Iser asay, even according to Rabbi Akiva, is not a problem of mamzeris. Doesn't create any mamzeris iser. So it is aser deraisa, but it's not going to create any psulim at all. So Gemara says that's only good according to everybody besides Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who holds it even a chavi asay creates a chalal. So the kid will be a chalal over here. So there is a psul. So the Gemara says, therefore you need another pshat. So the Gemara says we'll go to somebody who is bia with his wife, who is a suffix sota. Suffix sota is an iser deraisa, but there is no lav that's created because she's not a vade sota yet, so she's not also. Gemara says, but that's not good according to Masi ben Chorosh. Masi ben Chorosh holds that even if they're on the way to do hashka, to drink the sota water, and he's boil her, she has a psul zona that's created. She becomes a din zona. She's also to a kahuna. So the Gemara says we're going to have to go to a different case. We'll go to the case of a sota vadai. There, even according to that pshat, there's exeris akasav. It does not create a psul for anybody involved, and therefore there's no psul. And it is an issur deraisa. There's no psul, and she doesn't become a zona because she already is a sota vadai. She doesn't become any worse, and the kids don't become halal. So therefore, we're going to have to say that that's going to be the difference between the cases. It works out very nicely. It's an issur deraisa. Also labal, also laboa for a sota, and therefore she's an issur deraisa. Therefore, according to Rabbi's pshat, she should get iksuba. Issur deraisa gets iksuba because it doesn't need chesek, it doesn't need to be strengthened. But since there's no psul, so it's her fault, and therefore we take the iksuba away from her. All right, this concludes the Gemara's discussion on this mission. Now we get to our next Mishnah. This next mission discusses again the halachos of truma and who has a right to eat truma, and then it's going to talk about who has a right to eat meiser. So we've seen earlier that there's 3 cases. That if these 3 cases exist, it takes a woman out of her father's rishos and she's not in her husband's rishos. So if the father is the kohen, she loses the right to eat truma, and if her husband is the kohen, she doesn't get the right to eat truma. And those cases are a woman who is meureses, she's engaged either to a kohen or a Yisrael. She's not considered in either rishos. She's not considered in her father's rishos, not in her husband's rishos. If she's pregnant and she doesn't have a husband, I guess her husband, the kohen, he died, but she has a vlad, or she's shomeres yavam. She just has a zikas yavam to a kohen or to a Yisrael. Again, she's not in her father's rishos, she's not in her husband's rishos, and therefore she can't eat truma from either of them. Now the Mishnah goes to Levi. The Mishnah says the same 3 things. If it happens with a Levi, she doesn't have the right to eat meiser. Bas Yisrael, who's engaged to a Levi, she's pregnant from a Levi, or she's shomeres yavam to a Levi, or if she's a Bas Levi and she has the same thing with Yisrael, doesn't have either right, and she loses the right to for eating the meiser from his house. Now, what happens if it's a kohen to a Levi? Bas Levi mureses to a kohen, muberes from a kohen, or shomeres yavam to a kohen, or Bas kohen to a Levi. So she can't eat not truma and not meiser. She loses both reshuyos, both from kohen and from a meiser. So the Gemara asks right away. The Gemara begins. The Gemara asks right away. A Yisrael is allowed to eat meiser. There's no isser on anybody to eat meiser. The whole discussion doesn't make any sense. So the Gemara says this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that a non-Levi Yisrael is not allowed to eat meiser. And the Gemara quotes a brisa. Brisa says truma is to be eaten by a kohen. Meiser rishon belongs to a Levi. That's what Rabbi Meir holds. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says we allow kohanim to eat it. So the first opinion, Rabbi Meir, holds that Yisrael are not allowed to eat. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that the first opinion holds that even kohanim are not allowed to eat it. He matters kohanim. Nobody answers kohanim. So the Gemara says he doesn't mean to say that a kohen could eat it. Kohen could eat meiser according to all opinions. The question is about Yisrael, but what it means to say is that you can even give your meiser to a kohen. You don't have to give it to Leviim. Meiser could be given l'chatchila to a kohen instead of a Levi.